Welcome to Death, Lies, and Alibis. I'm your host, Christy, and this is the podcast that dives deep into the dark and eerie world of local cold cases. Today, we're in Grandview Heights, a small, lovely suburb nestled in the heart of Columbus, Ohio. It's bustling with tight-knit neighborhoods, friendly faces, and a sense of security that you'd expect from any small town. But beneath the idyllic surface lies a hidden darkness, a collection of unanswered questions that have lingered over the years. So grab your headphones and lock your doors, and be prepared to enter a world where the truth has invaded everyone. A frozen field, a young woman's body, dumped like trash in a frozen field, just blocks from home. Nearly 40 years later, her killer is still free. And in a quiet corner of Grandview Heights, right where Burrell used to meet Higgs Avenue, you'd never guess that field was once a crime scene. But on a freezing December morning back in 1987, that's where her body was found, exposed and alone. Margaret Durant was only 21 years old, strangled and sexually assaulted, left out in the cold like her life didn't matter. And nearly 4 decades later, there's still no answers, just whispers and suspicion. Margaret was murdered, and whoever did it walked away. This is more than an old case file. It's a story of a young woman whose future was stolen, a sister, a daughter, and a friend. And it's time we talk about what happened. Who wanted her gone? Why was her body found in that field? Why did certain people refuse DNA testing? And why did someone take out a $100,000 life insurance policy right before she died? Today, we open the case of Margaret Cicely Durant. Now, before we talk about the field, before we get into the crime scene and the autopsy, or even the suspects who still haven't answered for what they might know, you need to know Margaret, not just her name or her age. You need to feel who she really was. Margaret had a presence that stayed with you, gentle, sometimes quiet, but never forgettable. Margaret wasn't just a name in a case file. She was someone. She had a soft, natural beauty that didn't need any makeup or filters. And her hair was light brown, curly, wild in a free-spirited way. Like she didn't try to tame it too much, just let it be. And she had these big, expressive eyes that just seemed to see right through the noise. And when she smiled, it was a warm, not flashy smile, but it was real. The kind of smile that made you feel safe when you was around her. A young woman with her whole life ahead of her. Picture her that way, not as a victim, but as someone who was deeply loved. And you know, sometimes when we talk about the victims, people do forget that they were real. And Margaret was the youngest in her family, and her bond with her sister, Shirley Cooper, ran deep. Yes, they laughed together and they leaned on each other, but they weren't just close friends. They were soul connected. Shirley didn't just know Margaret, she understood her. Margaret's laugh lit up a room like a song breaking through silence. And speaking of songs, she was a music lover through and through. She'd crank up Barry Manilow like it was her own private concert. She loved Donnie and Marie Osmond. Soft voices, you know, the tender lyrics. Songs that made the world feel a little safer. And she had her own apartment in Grandview Heights, a quiet suburb just outside Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't just a place to live for her. It was her freedom, her own little piece of the world. She was working and living, trying to make her 20s mean something. She was just trying to build something steady. But that life goal was stolen. On December 11th, 1987, just 2 weeks before Christmas, Margaret didn't come home or didn't show up for work the next day, and she didn't answer her phone. And not long after that, her body was found in the frozen field, beaten and strangled. Someone took the life that she was trying to build. And it's not that she died, it was how she was taken. Someone decided to play God and make a choice that she just wasn't important. But she was plenty important to her family and those friends who loved her. And the people who knew her best will tell you that Margaret didn't run with trouble. She wasn't reckless. She didn't bring this on herself. She was kind and loyal. Naive at times, too trusting, yes, but full of love for the people close to her. And her story deserves more than to be a police file. It deserves to be remembered out loud. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Not the way the old reports did, but the way she deserves. And when you hear what come next, what was found and what was ignored, and who refused to cooperate, you'll understand why this case can't stay cold. So today, we're not just reopening a case, we're reopening a life that was cut short, and a story that deserves to be told all the way through. It was Thursday, December 10th, 1987. Just another icy night in Grandview Heights, a kind of place where people could leave their doors unlocked, a neighborhood that felt safe. Margaret had carved out a life there, quiet and steady. It was hers. She had just finished her shift at the limited distribution center where she worked as security. A quiet job for a quiet girl. Dependable and steady. Margaret would show up, she did her job, and she went home. And that night should have been no different. Check out, go home, maybe curl up some music like Air Supply or REO Speedwagon. Something soft and familiar. But the next morning, Friday, December 11th, Margaret didn't show up for work. No call and no messages. And if you knew Margaret, you knew that wasn't like her, and people noticed. People felt it. Around 8 a.m., a crew of gas utility workers stumbled onto something no one should ever have to see. Margaret, lying out in the cold in that field near Burrow and Higgs, partially clothed, bruised, and strangled. She didn't collapse there. She was dumped there. And that frozen ground erased any evidence her killer might have left. And what makes this worse, where she was just blocks from her apartment, a place that should have felt safe. Now, whether she made it home that night, it's still a question no one was able to answer or willing to answer. Because when police went back and they checked her apartment, they found her front door wide open. It wasn't cracked halfway, not like that. It was weird. It was just wide open. But there was no signs of forced entry at all. And no active proof, though, that she had ever made it back there. Just a dark, cold silence. She was found with no ID and no wallet. Nothing to say who she was. So they took her to the morgue, unnamed and unclaimed, for 4 lonely days, until December 15th. Her father walks into the morgue and has to do what no parent should ever have to do. He looked at her through the glass and he said her name. That's how they confirmed it was Margaret. 4 days after she was murdered, her family finally got the call. Not from a hospital, not from a detective cracking open the case, but from a morgue. Murdered in her own neighborhood. And the world just kept on turning. No front page headlines, no citywide alert, just people doing life. No arrests and no closures. And to this day, no one's been held accountable for what happened between the time that Margaret left work and the moment her father had to stand behind the coroner's glass wall and stare at the worst truth imaginable. Shirley never forgot the moment she found out her baby sister was gone.
It was 3 a.m. Someone knocked on our door. One of them knew my husband and said he had a message for me. He told me to call my father, but we didn't have a phone. We had to use a payphone. He said to make sure my husband was with me when I made the call because it was bad news. But no one answered. Later, I found out it was because my dad was down at the morgue, identifying her. The next morning, I walked to the phone and called again. My dad picked up. He was crying, just kept saying her name over and over again. Margaret. It's Margaret. I thought maybe she was in a car accident or in the hospital. But when he said she died, I don't even remember how I walked back home. I was in shock. I got to my apartment and dropped to the floor. I couldn't stop crying.
That's the moment her whole world changed. And from that moment on, Shirley has never stopped fighting. And back at school, Margaret's younger brother, Fred, just a senior in high school, was pulled from class.
I was sitting in school, got called to the office, and my family was there. I was told that my sister passed away and was killed.
That moment split his world in two, just like it did for Shirley. Whoever did this didn't just get close to her. It seemed like they knew her. They knew how to disappear, too. But what they didn't count on was what her body would reveal. So far, we don't know if Margaret ever made it home. Her door was wide open. There was no forced entry. Her body was abandoned in the field. And also later, we found out that her vehicle was abandoned with her purse left in it. And now let's talk about the autopsy. The coroner confirmed what Margaret's family already knew. She didn't die peacefully. She was murdered brutally in the most gruesome ways. Strangulation is up close and personal, and it takes a while to kill somebody with your bare hands. Her body told of a severe trauma. Margaret was sexually assaulted. She fought desperately to survive because her hands told the story, scraped raw from fighting. There had to be physical evidence, the kind that should have triggered action, tests, warrants, suspects, but somehow it didn't. Margaret had no drugs or alcohol in her system. She knew exactly what was happening to her. This wasn't an accident or wrong place, wrong time. It was personal, violent, and deliberate. Now, we're not going to go over every clinical detail here. Margaret deserves better than to have her worst night of her life reduced to a checklist. We will review some of the autopsies reports in our private Facebook group where we can honor her memory properly. For now, though, just know this. Her body told the truth. Her wounds spoke volumes. And what came next should have been justice, but instead, it was excuses. Someone put Margaret in that field. That didn't just happen. She didn't walk there. She didn't collapse there. She was dumped. And not long after her body was found, her car turned up. It was abandoned miles away in downtown Columbus. And like I said, they found her purse with her ID inside the car. Now ask yourself, how did it get there? Who moved it? Well, let's start with someone close to her, Chris Miller. Chris and Margaret had been on again and off again since high school, and their relationship, well, allegedly toxic, doesn't even scratch the surface. I was told he was controlling and manipulative, the kind that drains the life out of someone. And by the time Margaret was gaining her independence, they had finally broken up. She was getting away from him and finally blossoming into a beautiful young woman. Then she turned up dead. At first, Chris told investigators he hadn't seen her in days. But later, he changed his story. Turned out he had seen her. And just like that, he has an alibi. His father, Harold Miller. They claim they were both together that night, all night, just the two of them. No witnesses, no receipts, no surveillance footage, just father and son vouching for each other. And when investigators asked Chris for a DNA sample, he agreed, and he didn't match. But when they asked Harold to submit a sample, he flat out refused. Now, come on, someone's daughter is dead, has been murdered, and a grown man who puts himself in this story refuses to give a DNA sample, and his son has changed his story. Who does that? Who does that? Red flags. Well, they couldn't get a court order due to lack of evidence, so the case just stalled. Now remember, this was back in 1987, back when DNA testing was so new. Evidence handling was probably sloppy by today's standards. A lot of material that could have been crucial might have not been collected or wasn't preserved. Well, now let's fast forward. Grandview Heights police did reopen the case in 2014 and then again in 2016, but nothing came of it. No charges, no suspects, no resolution. Some evidence was sent to the BCI, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, But what was tested? Was it stored right? Was it viable still? Well, no results have ever been shared with the public. And just like that, they were back to silence again. Well, it makes you wonder that if that evidence, the same evidence, was re-examined today with modern forensic tools, would we finally have an answer? Would someone finally be behind bars after all these years? And just when you think this case couldn't get any darker, a $100,000 life insurance policy enters the picture. A life insurance policy that never should have existed. We're going to take a break right here, and we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, we're back. Let's talk about motive, because sometimes when all the emotions are stripped back, the truth comes out. And in this case, the motive might have been the ugliest one of all, greed, all wrapped up around the high and mighty dollar. After Margaret's death, her sister Shirley found out something that was pretty sickening. A $100,000 life insurance policy, taken out in Margaret's name, but not by her. The man who allegedly took this out is Harold Miller, her ex-boyfriend's father. Yes, he allegedly took out a life insurance policy in Margaret's name, paid just 1 month's premium, and listen to this. He named himself as the sole beneficiary, and then not too long after that, Margaret turned up dead. Now, this is the same man who refused to give a DNA test. The same man who had his son alibi for him, named him as the only beneficiary. And not too long after that, Margaret was not alive anymore. That's a red flag. Now, Harold and Chris did become persons of interest, but instead of a full payout going just to him, the money did get split because nobody believed that Margaret would sign that. Nobody believed that was Margaret's signature, or if she did sign it, she didn't know what she was signing. Shirley told me in an interview it was divided between Margaret's ex-boyfriend, Chris Miller, their abusive stepmother, who Margaret didn't even like, and Margaret's father. Now think about that. Chris, who's changed his story about the night Margaret died, he got paid. The stepmother, the wicked stepmother, she wasn't even family to Margaret. She got a chunk. And Margaret's father, he got the big chunk. But what makes this worse? Out of his share, Margaret's father gave $10,000 back to Harold Miller, the prime person of interest. He told Shirley he did it so Harold wouldn't fight for all the money. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not protecting your daughter. That's helping her possible killer walk away with a payday. And the one person who got nothing, the one who stayed up all night worrying, filed reports, called the police, pressed for the case, the one still fighting for Margaret to this very day. Yes, Shirley, she didn't get a thing. And this isn't the first time her dad made money off tragedy. When Shirley's mother was still alive, doctors warned that another pregnancy would just kill her. Well, she was sick and she was on bed rest, and somehow, miraculously, ended up pregnant again. Now, according to Shirley, she believes her father forced himself on her mother. And when she died shortly after, she found out he had a life insurance policy on her mother. Same story, same pattern. Also, Shirley claims afterwards she found a box containing Margaret's underwear in her father's dresser. This is a type of betrayal that goes deep. It's buried deep in the branches of our own family tree. This is sickness, and it's a powerful motive. This is what happens when silence protects the monsters. And there's one more family member we need to talk about. Someone who may have been even closer to the crime. Let's talk about someone closer to Margaret than her ex. Someone inside her own family. Margaret's younger brother, Scott Durant. Now, he was just 17 at the time of Margaret's murder, still in high school. But even back then, things just didn't add up. And let's start with this. When Margaret's Mustang was found, abandoned miles from the crime scene, Scott's fingerprints were on the steering wheel. And if his prints were on the steering wheel, and we hear that Margaret never let others drive her car, was he the last person to move it? Was he helping someone cover their tracks? Was he part of this? Well, nobody knows because nobody really pushed for answers. And Shirley's been asking these questions for decades. And over the years, more red flags surfaced. Shirley says Scott was later allegedly accused of sexually assaulting a woman in Florida. Yeah, different time, different state, the same type of violence, same silence. Now, let's be clear. This doesn't prove that he hurt Margaret or that he did anything to Margaret. But if you're the brother of a woman who was sexually assaulted and strangled, and your fingerprints are on her car, you'd think you'd be screaming for answers. And instead of helping push for answers, Scott kept telling Shirley the same thing over again: let it go, stop digging, leave it alone. Who does that when a sibling has been murdered and you're being asked questions of why your fingerprints are in the steering wheel? Yes, this is a part of the story that's not comfortable, but comfort doesn't solve cold cases. Truth does. And when Shirley's the only one still asking questions, it makes you wonder just how deep this silence does go. So I want to tell you my theory on what happened that night. I want you to join our Facebook group. Come over to the Facebook group. I want to hear your theory. Here's mine. I think Margaret did make it home. I think someone she knew very well, maybe someone she trusted, was already waiting. I think things escalated. Words were exchanged, rage. Maybe she said no to something. I think it turned violent. I don't think it was a stranger or a random act. I think someone knew her routine. Who had a reason? Who had something to gain? I think more than one person helped cover this up. And someone cashed a check they should have never touched. I think everybody was covering their tracks. That's what I think. In my unprofessional opinion, that's the feelings I get. That's my opinion. But here's the truth. What I think, it doesn't solve this crime. But someone out there knows the truth and could help solve this murder. Not everyone fights, but Shirley Cooper does. For nearly 40 years, she's carried her sister's name like a mission. Margaret wasn't just her baby sister. She was her world. And while some family members choose silence or distance, Shirley chooses to raise hell, and she hasn't stopped since. She became a correction officer, and now she's studying criminal justice. She started a Facebook page, Find My Sister's Killer, not just to remember Margaret, but to push her case forward. She filed records and requests. She's chased leads, emailed investigators who's never replied. She sat across from cops making empty promises. And let's be honest, her family hasn't always backed her. Some of her siblings wanted her to move on. They say, let it go, trust the system. But Shirley, she's not wired that way. She has dreams about Margaret. And Fred, Margaret's younger brother, he says, this case could have had answers. Instead, it's had excuses. But through all the silence and all the delays and all the heartbreak, Shirley keeps going. This isn't just a fight for justice. It's a fight for dignity, for her sisters whose voice was stolen and whose story deserves to be told with all the truth. If there's one thing this case has shown us, it's that the truth doesn't speak for itself. It needs somebody to carry it, to scream it when the world goes quiet. And that's what Shirley Cooper has done. And by listening, you're part of that fight now. So tonight, we're not just closing an episode, we're opening a door that's been locked with silence, fear, and secrets. And behind that door, that's where the answers are. So before we wrap up, let me tell you what we're going to do next. This month, we're launching a campaign. It's called Hands for Margaret. It's a movement built on action and a fight for justice. Because Margaret Durant's hands, they told the truth. And now it's time for our hands to speak too. Hands that can write, hands that can call, hands that can repost, hands that can hold signs and open doors that have stayed shut for nearly 40 years. And we're taking this campaign online, on the ground, and right into people's mailboxes. Because Margaret Durant was only 21. She was sweet and too trusting, and she forgave people who didn't deserve it. She never had a chance to grow old or build a family. Instead, she was left abandoned, like she didn't matter, but she did matter, and she still does. So if you know something, anything out there about what happened to Margaret Durant, now is the time to speak. Contact the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. Reach out to Grandview Heights Police. Or you can message Shirley Cooper directly through her Facebook page, Find My Sister's Killer. You don't have to give your name. You just have to do the right thing. Because Shirley deserves more than memories. She deserves justice. And that justice, it starts with us. I did reach out to Chris Miller for an interview, and I've not been contacted back so far. Now, Harold Miller, Margaret's father, and her stepmother have all passed on, and the truth with them has passed. Now, before I close, I just want to give you a quick reminder. Everyone named in this episode is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. I'm not a lawyer or a detective or a medical expert. I gather very public information. I present it to you for you to do your own research and form your own opinions. Death, Lies, and Alibis is for entertainment and educational purposes only. And that's it for this episode of Death, Lies, and Alibis. We hope that by shining a light on these local crimes, we have sparked something within you, our listeners. Because the truth is, solving these cases will take more than just our words. It's going to require the dedication and collective efforts of the entire community. Now, don't forget to hit the follow button on the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. To learn more about how to get your case featured on the show, or to get instant access to case files and reports, plus documents and many free resources, go to our Facebook group, Death, Lies, and Alibis, and join today. Or email us at deathliesalibis@gmail.com. As always, be safe, stay alert, and never stop seeking justice.